Good morning. Today is the 25th day of September 2017, and I'm pleased to bring you a new series entitled Poetry for the Soul, Part 1. There are an infinite number of poetry books. In my collection, which numbers more than 200, I could easily add 1,000 more. I call this Poetry for the Soul and share it with you because you are touched by the beauty and power of poetry. For it ranks alongside music, art, and architecture among the highest expressions of mankind. Poetry for the Soul has been many years in the making, and I have joyously devoted myself to research from many, many books, and now, through the internet, searching for quotations of great thought. Often, even of the spirit, at times humorous, thought-provoking, and more. So let us begin, concentrating deeply within, in a state of calm, that we might identify with many of these marvelous quotations. 1. We can read poetry and recite poetry, but to live poetry is the symphony of life. Sir Francis Foote. 2. Poetry makes immortal all that is best and beautiful in the world. Percy Bysshe Shelley. 3. Poetry should please by a fine excess and not by singularity. It should strike the reader as a wording of his own highest thoughts and appear almost as a remembrance. John Keats. 4. Poetry is vocal painting, as painting is silent poetry. Simonides of Sivas. 5. Genuine poetry can communicate before it is understood. T.S. Eliot. 6. The figure a poem makes. It begins in delight and ends in wisdom. The figure is the same as for love. Robert Frost. 7. The only thing that can save the world is the reclaiming of the awareness of the world. That's what poetry does. Allen Ginsberg. 8. If there's no money in poetry, neither is there poetry in money. Robert Graves. 9. I'd as soon as write free verse as play tennis with the net down. Robert Frost. 10. The poetical language of an age should be the current language heightened. Gerard Manley Hopkins. 11. To a poet, nothing can be useless. Samuel Johnson. 12. If poetry comes not as naturally as the leaves to a tree, it had better not come at all. John Keats. 13. Poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. Percy Bysshe Shelley. 14. To have great poets, there must be great audiences too. Walt Whitman. The poet is the priest of the invisible. Wallace Stevens. 16. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion, recollected in tranquility. William Wordsworth. 17. Immature poets imitate. Mature poets steal. T.S. Eliot. 18. I believe the poets. It is they who utter wisdom from the central deep, and, listening to the inner flow of things, speak to the age out of eternity. James Russell Lowell. 19. I've read some of your modern free verse and wonder who set it free. John Barrymore. 20. Any poet, if he is to survive as a writer beyond his 25th year, must alter. He must seek new literary influences. He will have different emotions to express. T.S. Eliot. 21. Let us extract it, poetry, beauty, from everything, for it exists in everything and everywhere. There isn't a single atom but that contains thought. And let us grow accustomed to considering the world as a work of art. Gustave Flaubert. 22. It is necessary to be a seer, to make oneself a seer. The poet makes himself a seer by a long, immense, and reasoned unruliness of the senses. He attains the unknown. Arthur Rimbaud. 23. A grain of poetry suffices to season a century. José Martí. 24. Poetry is the work of the bard and of the people who inspire him. José Martí. 25. A poet can survive anything but a misprint. Oscar Wilde. 26. You explain nothing, O poet, but thanks to you, all things become explicable. Paul Claudel. 27. The reader who is illuminated is, in a real sense, the poem. Henry Major. 28. Poetry is a way of taking life by the throat. Robert Frost. 29. A poem is a meteor. Wallace Stevens. 30. A poem should be part of one's sense of life. Wallace Stevens. 31. My poems are hymns of praise to the glory of life. Dame Edith Sitwell. 32. The great poet, in writing himself, writes his time. T.S. Eliot. 34. Poetry is an act of peace. Peace goes into the making of a poet as flour goes into the making of bread. Pablo Neruda. 36. Poetry is a deep inner calling in man. From it came liturgy, the Psalms, and also the content of religions. Pablo Neruda. 37. The poet may be used as the barometer, but let us not forget that he is also part of the weather. Lionel Trilling. And here's a quatrain from W.H. Auden on William Butler Yeats. Earth, receive an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest. let the Irish vessel lie emptied of its poetry. 39. You can tear a poem apart to see what makes it technically tick. You're back with the mystery of having been moved by words. The best craftsmanship always leaves holes and gaps in the work of the poem, so that something that is not in the poem can creep, crawl, flash, or thunder in. The joy and function of poetry is and was the celebration of man, which is also the celebration of man. Dylan Thomas. 40. When power leads man towards arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. For art establishes the basic human truths which must serve as the touchstone of our judgment. John F. Kennedy.